You look great.
Thank you.
There's light in your eyes.
Thank you.
And, you're carrying yourself. You're light on your feet. And for good reason, you got a lot out of your system on this record.
Sure did.
And more than that, that would be personal and enough for you just to do it. But we're getting a lot out of the result.
Thank you.
Amazing record.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that means a lot. It was a life-changing experience for me. And this is actually also, it's funny, like the first time too, I mean, maybe I felt like this in my other albums. I don't remember, but it's the first time I put out an album and been immediately like just ready to go back in and keep writing.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you made space for yourself. That's why.
Yeah, and I think it's also my brain really associates it with fun and joy. And so I'm like, not, like sometimes I feel like it can feel like you worked so hard and now I get to kind of rest, take some time off from the studio. And I think because it felt not like that for me, it just felt like fun and joyful and easy. I'm just like, I'm ready to go back in, hang out with my friends and write about, some more feelings that I'm having.
And you can.
Yeah.
Because you can ultimately put music out when you want, write it when you
totally.
want. I mean, you've earned that right. I wanted to talk to you a little bit just to start with about the idea of ambition and self-fulfillment and what we put into ourselves in terms of what we think is going to heal us and make us feel great.
Mm-hmm.
In relation to the success that you had out the gate as a solo artist, when you emerged from that, the Grammys, all those heady things that I saw you at, it was like you're in a typhoon.
Right.
When you came out the other end of that, did you have to do some work on yourself and go, it's not actually going to do it. That's not going to achieve what I need to achieve personally?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's so many different layers to that. Like, I think it's like starting out when I was 15 and the toll that kind of, before you really know who you are, that kind of like external kind of pressure can take on your nervous system. Like, it's kind of like you're always feeling like the most important thing is the next performance. The most important thing is, it kind of like what felt like to me before, like getting through the performance, and like killing the performance. And I feel like that kind of leaves no space for you to be able to have feelings, especially at that age when you feel like you don't even have enough space to have like, to feel, I don't know, to have, maybe anxiety about one thing or
how do you
like,
even know what to call it at that point?
Yeah, exactly. You don't know what to call it. By the way, I've been watching, you would actually really love this, Atlas of the Heart with Brené Brown.
Oh, I need to see this. I like her a lot.
Yes, and her whole thing, which has been so inspiring for me, songwriting-wise too, is the importance of language when it comes to the human experience and how important naming a feeling, like how naming a feeling affects your experience. Like there's such a difference between being like, I'm anxious or I'm excited, like between just saying that and naming it, like really affects how you feel. And she talks about how human beings, we need more language in order to connect with others, connect with ourselves. And so there's like, she was talking about how there's 3 basic emotions that everybody talks about: happy, sad, and pissed off. But there's so many different layers, different like kind of sub genres or whatever of those feelings. Like she talks about the difference between stress and overwhelm, the difference between, anguish and grief, like, below the kind of broader sphere of sadness. And I feel like that's something that really excited me songwriting wise in this album. I was reading a lot of like Sally Rooney novels and got into a lot of poetry. And I feel like I just started to tap into it in this album. And I'm excited to keep kind of going into that further, is like the details.
Oh, it's all about the detail. I'm so glad you said that. This album is so in the detail. And there's a word that keeps coming up right now. Being aware. Yeah. That's the difference between transferring being the word overwhelmed into stress or vice versa. You're rounding them into each other. Mm-hmm. But an awareness of how you're truly feeling, taking just a second to acknowledge what is actually going on, allows you to actually identify what it is in more detail, better understand it. And for you, who is a communicator, in your passion, you communicate. That gives you a chance to better understand it and put it into detail. And that's what's on this album. Like, you're diving into this in a really aware way.
Yeah. And I think it's like, for example, like a song like Psycho Freak is, I feel like, where I really was like, oh, this is what's exciting to me about songwriting. Like before, I feel like I maybe would have just been like, you know, had a line where the word anxiety was in it. But in this one, it's like, you know, I wish I could just, yeah, it's like, what does it look like? And what does it feel like in my body? What kind of thoughts do I have? And so that was the first time I feel like I really was like kind of, I think this album process made me so excited about like kind of re-inspired me in terms of lyrics, because I was so like, I started off like being really excited about lyrics when I first started writing. Then I was like so into melodies and kind of was like not as inspired by the lyrics. And then I rediscovered like why I love lyrics, which is just like the details of things and getting to really like put words around, like to put in a song, like, you know, I wish that I could just like chill and not have to like leave this restaurant, and like describing what that felt like for me in terms of like everybody feels like they're like having such an easy time living life, and like the simplest things for me, like going to dinner or being social, feel really hard for me right now. And yeah, just like getting to talk about what that felt like in my body, what that felt like, what thoughts played out in my mind. I was like, that's so much more interesting than just being like, I'm anxious.
Psycho Freak, you did such a great job along with Willow of helming this into something that had a structure to it, because the beat just, I felt like you could have probably, maybe you did listen to this track for like an hour. It has this soothing, incredible modern strangeness to it. It's got all the right level of experimentation, but it's very meditative.
I'm in a much better place right now in terms of anxiety and mental health, like the best I've ever been. Like I'm great. And we've had, you know, off record conversations about this too. I'm so great now. And I actually, when I talk about this, I don't want people to be like worried about me, like, is she okay? But it's just what I was going through at the time.
Of course.
And I remember that's day.
That's very thoughtful of you as well, because fans, we do get concerned about our artists. It's a good part of the trade.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's nice that you reset that.
Yeah, totally. So I'm great now. You know, I still have my moments, but not like this day. And this day was just another day where I was kind of like having, you know, my kind of obsessional anxiety days. And I didn't even start by talking about it that day in the studio. He just played that track, and like that beginning synth sound, like that, like just like felt like how I feel like when I'm experiencing those patterns in my body and mind. And I just kind of went in the studio and just like started talking about it.
When I met you for the first time, I could never have known that you were going through that doubt about what people expect from me, because you were so real out the gate. It's like the person that I met was waiting for the artist to catch up.
100%. Those are the perfect words for that. I think I went into the studio a lot wanting to prove myself as a songwriter and prove myself as an artist, and then also personality-wise, definitely feeling like, and a therapist actually said that to me. She was like, going to the studio has to stop feeling like a performance for you, because it. Yeah.
That is the realest thing that someone in your most private, vulnerable place can say to you, that cuts to the core of where you see your value in that moment.
100%.
Wow.
And so it's funny, knowing that and doing the inner work of therapy, I feel like my intentions for this album was, I don't want to do that. And so I ended up really attracting people that responded when I did expose myself and when I was vulnerable, which is why I was so great with Ricky and Scott, because I felt like, and I think this is something that happens to women in general, women in pop as like a sub, like whatever, I keep saying sub genre, whatever, sub world of that, where it's like you want to be seen as a full, whole person, you know? And I think like with women, this happens a lot. And with women, and I felt like this too, it's like, and maybe it was something that I was getting from the world and not necessarily from the people around me, but it felt like you can take me being sexy and confident and sassy, but you can't take me feeling weird in my own skin. Like it just doesn't match up to the image that you have of me or what you want from me. And I feel like I was working with people this time, especially Ricky and Scott, that really saw me as a whole person, and therefore the music became like that.
When I pressed play on this album and listened to it, I knew from the beginning from Familiar that it was going to be something that was very deliberately created, put together, very loving gift, right? Like not just a collection of songs.
Yeah, definitely.
Like
Loving gift, yes.
When I got to a song like Boys Don't Cry, I was like, all right, she's in her bag, because when you're able to make something that's so catchy and connected and modern, but such a tough subject to cross, that is a tough subject to cross. Because what you're doing, and from that song, at least in my opinion, is that you are selflessly acknowledging someone else's inability to share, but it's ultimately going to be at the expense of yourself.
Totally.
And you know it. And that's why that song is so brutal, because you kind of know it. And when you hear it, it's just like, wow, man, it's a powerful one, that one.
Yeah. And it's, I remember at that time writing it for, you know, for the man in my life. And I remember having it in I remember that being like something that we talked about a lot, but it's been really cool to see how other men in my life, like my dad, for example, or he's my choreographer, but also one of my best friends, Calvit, how it just sparks up a conversation that I think is really beautiful. And I keep seeing it in the men in my life too, where it's like, that's something that they're like, oh, wow. Like I didn't, it almost like is like a breath of relief for them, because it kind of opens the space for it to be talked about. Actually, Brené Brown says something like this in her Atlas of the Heart thing, where it's like, she basically uses clips from movies to talk about different emotions. And there's like this one scene where it's the scene from this movie Chef, where Jon Favreau is like screaming at the critic.
It's one of my favorite films ever.
Yeah, it's so good. And she talks about how it's like shame or something but she's like, the acceptable way for men to express shame, the only way for them to express shame is through rage.
Through aggression.
Yeah. And
you see it all the time, by the way, because if someone does something wrong, in particular, I've seen this within my own behavior.
Yeah.
I've seen this in other male friends in my life. I know in myself, and I know in them, they know immediately that they fucked up.
Yeah.
But for at least a day, you're just going to get this form of sort of defensive, I kind of fucked up, but I kind of didn't. And it's like, there are reasons for this and da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
And it's like, and eventually it all just comes crashing down.
And it's funny, it's the same thing that we were actually talking about before that happens to women in a different way. You're just not seeing somebody as a full person.
Yeah.
Like, you're just not seeing a man as a full human being. So it's not, you know, it's like the aggression and all that stuff is allowed, but not the other stuff.
And listen, I know how this works. You know, there are lots of people who are brilliant at what they do, who are going to guide you into this room when the time is right. But I just need you to know that, friend to friend, this door is always open if you ever want to come in and hang out.
Thank you.
For one reason or another.
And I really do always want to come.